webinar today, you can call our office directly, 800-713-7013, and they will be able to help you with any technical issues you're having with the webinar. All right, so today it's all about automating business processes, and if you look at the invitation that you received, you'll see a number of bullets of the basically the agenda of what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with typical areas where you would identify that a business process is helpful, and then we're going to show you how to create a library of those processes within your database itself. So let's start with that. When would you use a business process? A business process is whenever there's a repeatable steps that need to be taken within your business based on a certain point. So for example, if a prospect comes on board, you might have a process that says this is what we do when a new prospect comes on board. We will send them a piece of literature, we will follow up with an email and or a phone call. That might be your process. Another repeatable steps would typically be when a prospect becomes a customer. For customers, we might have a letter that goes out there, welcome them aboard, and there might be a follow-up email and or a call, and maybe a gift that you send out to new customers, and maybe within a week or so, you will have a follow-up call from the owner of the company. Any of those specific repeatable steps that you want to make sure will happen each time that a certain event happens, then you'll be able to use a process for. So let's, with that in the back of your mind, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some examples of processes that are already in your sample database, and you'll see how they're built and how you can proceed to build more of those. And then we're going to show you how you can use those processes once they're programmed in the system. We're going to show you how you can use them throughout the system. So let's start with the process itself. First, I'm going to go ahead and log into the sample database. And by the way, I'm using a sample data file that ships with your results system. So if you're on your desktop, you have an icon that's called results typically, and one icon called results with sample data. This is the sample data that I'm using currently right now. All right, so where are processes set up? You would go to the setup menu. Anything to do with lookup tables, setting up users, setting up processes is all done from the setup menu. Let's take a look at a couple of those examples that are already in the sample database. So if I go to the maintain processes is what I clicked on, you will see a lookup table style. This is the way our screens work with the lookup tables, where you would have a listing of items on the left-hand side, and then the detail around each of those records will be on the right-hand side. So let's take a look at some of those sample examples. There is seems to be a process that's already in place for a person asking for customer care. So this is for renewing their maintenance contract with you, for example. There seems to be a process, or we have a sample process here for when a new customer comes on board. So the description on that, the process name will be given on the top, and description on that is activities to complete when a new customer is brought on board. So we're going to use those two as the next couple of steps. So let's go ahead and drill in a little bit further and see what those do. In this case, we have programmed 3 specific steps to take effect when a process is triggered. And we'll talk about what it means to trigger a process, effectively activate. So, sorry for sounding technical, but it's effectively activating a process, and in results, there's different ways of activating a process. We'll talk about those shortly. So when this process is activated, we want 3 things to happen. We want an activity to be registered and inserted in the system, and programmed to be trigger within 1 day of today. And at that point, we would consider that we're 30% done with that process. Then there's a letter that will be sent out from customer service. And at that point, within 2 days of when it's triggered, and that will be considered 75%. And then there's a meeting that will be scheduled within 7 days, a follow-up meeting. I'm going to drill into each of those and show you a little bit more detail. I just want to make sure that first, just the ability to read quickly through a process is easy to engage. If you, on the other hand, look at what we do with a lead being a prospect or an entity that's interested in doing business with your firm, they come in. This is the process that follows once a lead has been identified. then in this case, we are going to be making a phone call to introduce, and we'll read more about that. So then there's going to be a follow-up email that is scheduled and needs to be sent, and then there's going to be a follow-up call that will also be scheduled in the system and needs to be tracked. All right. So what we're going to do with those right now is a couple of things. When we look at the process, we know that we are able to execute it. It's basically the system is memorizing the 3 steps in this case that's going to be happening when a customer comes on board. And in this case, we're going to be able to do 3 steps for a new lead. All right, so let's exit from here. And let's go and take a look and looking at one of the many ways in which a process can be triggered. We're going to go to maintain a contact records. We're going to go to a prospect. So to search for a prospect, I start typing in the column here, PR, and I found the lead. I'm able to open up this record itself up and look at the activities, and I'll notice that there are no activities scheduled right now. These are tasks or steps that might have already happened or need to happen. So in this case, what I'm able to do, I'm able to add manually. If I knew what to do with a lead, I would be able to click on add like you might be doing all along right now, select an item from the drop-down, and go ahead and add those records one by one. For a process to kick in, it is actually a much more effective way of adding activities. So instead of manually adding one and maybe forgetting one or the other or not putting the right information in there, we can activate what's called a process. So notice how I clicked in here and it said I want to activate a process. It's going to give me a list of the processes in the system. I'm going to click on the drop-down, and in this case, this person is a lead, so I'm going to decide that I'm going to engage the new lead process. When I click OK, the system will let me know that the new lead process has been triggered. I manually triggered it. This is called a manual trigger, and so when I click OK, you'll notice, if you remember when we were looking at how many steps there were when we were dealing with the lead, and there were 3 of them, and they were all inserted automatically in the system. In this case, even though I'm logged in as Mary, you'll notice also that those specific steps were assigned to Dimitri. So that's one quick thing to note, that when you are working with a process, sometimes there are unique or specific steps that you want a certain person within the organization to take charge of. So you'll notice that if I go back to the design of this, you can tell from the design that Dimitri was assigned those specific tasks that are in the system. So effectively then, a process is one or more activities based on the activity types that you already have programmed in the system, and they're going to be automatically inserted in the database for you, so the different team members will be notified of what they need to do in the system based on a certain event happening within the organization. All right, so we saw how we could do this specifically ourselves. Let's say I want to now go to a prospect record. And for a prospect record, we'll look at an activity, and there's already a bunch of activities already here, but I can also activate a process manually and go ahead and say, this is what we're going to do with a prospect. But what if we want to make sure that our staff are basically making sure that everything is done? So you can do all the training in the world that you want to, but sometimes individuals get busy with other events and they will not necessarily follow the steps that they need to. So what might be best is to actually figure out how to leverage processes automatically. And let me show you how to do that. There's actually multiple places in results where processes can be triggered automatically, and this is the first one of them. You can go to the contact types. This is under setup. You go to the contact types. And since the most important events within an organization are things like when a lead comes on board, they contact you because they saw something on the website, and they're still not qualified. You know, you haven't talked to them. You're not sure whether there's going to be an interest or whether you're going to be able to have them become a customer. So that's called a lead. So instead of having your staff remember to activate the process manually like we just did, you notice up here there's a sentence that says process to activate when the contact type is assigned. Let's click on that drop-down, and we can say, look, when we add a new record and we specify that they are a lead, I would like this lead process to activate. You just now took that burden away and made it the responsibility of results to do that for you. That's one of the more important and the easiest way for automation to kick in. Let's also go and program in the prospect. If a person becomes a prospect, there's a series of steps that we do, and that's sitting in a process called New Prospects. We're going to click Save. I'm going to do one more. We're going to go ahead and jump ahead and say, okay, when a person becomes a customer, we're also going to have a new customer process trigger automatically. And I'm going to hit a Save button. Right, so what does that just mean right now? It means that you no longer have to worry about your staff remembering or putting that burden pressure on them to remember to do that. That basically means the following. If you go to this prospect, and this prospect right now has 3 items in there, and this prospect just was excited about the quotation you just gave them and decided to become a customer, and you would go now and change their contact type from a prospect to a regular customer. That's the new category that they are under, and you hit Save. You'll notice that you didn't even have to worry about or remember that there was a process, and that process needs to be triggered manually. We made the system do that for you. As soon as that contact type has been assigned, the new process now kicked in, and when you click OK to acknowledge that you saw that, then those 3 specific things, remember we had a phone call, a letter, and a meeting, and there were a number of days from today. So while the lead was all triggered immediately today, and you can decide how you can reschedule them or move them to a different date based on how well your call goes, then a new account was handled differently. So if we go to Setup, remember 2 days apart and then 7 days apart. So if you go to the Setup, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you one quick feature here. You're able to let the system know that you want to open up more than one screen at a time with this configuration options in the middle of the screen. Allow more than one screen to open automatically. So I'm going to go to the Setup and keep this Maintain open and remind you that under Customer, we had a service call within 1 day, we had a service letter within 2 days, we had a meeting within 7 days. And then when we actually worked with that record itself and triggered automatically triggered the process, then all that information got scheduled a number of days ahead from the day we're on. All right, let me show you a little bit more detail behind each of those specific items so you would know how to set them up. Actually, if you don't mind, I had promised that we're going to show you how to do a process from scratch. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we're going to come in and design a new process, and this new process is going to be for doing something on-site. So we're going to refer to this as on-site work. And these are the steps taken when working on-site. Fixes the typo there, so we're going to hit Save. This is the name of the process. We set it up here, and now we're ready to add line items to it at the bottom section of the screen. So typically steps should be given a number. My recommendation is put them in a multiple of 10. This way, if you decide to insert an extra step between 2 steps that were already existing, you don't have to renumber everything. So we'll do them as a multiple of 10. We'll go ahead and do the first thing. We're going to first make a phone call. And you notice what I'm doing. I'm just selecting from a activity type because I'm programming in the system what's going to happen when somebody asks us to come on site. And this is going to be on the day in which that it got triggered. So I don't need to move it up by a date. It would be today's date. And then we are able to override the assign. Let's say we have a person in the office. The name is George, and George is the only one that schedules those phone calls. And this would be overriding the description that comes with the activity type to write one specifically to this process. We can say call and schedule on-site visit. Does that make sense? So when we're asked to do an on-site visit, we're going to go and schedule. We're going to have somebody call and figure out what's the best way to do it. We're going to go ahead and put some notes here if necessary. You can say, for example, ask for mobile number, ask for another member of the family, to contact in case of an emergency, etc. So you can give them even further instructions of what to do when they're scheduling the call. Let's do one more. So the extra step here is to actually go on site. So step number 20 is to actually go on site. So we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to go to the on-site visit. And then the on-site visit will be whoever is going to be triggering this event, right? And then we can basically leave everything else as defaulted by the on-site visit. On-site visit is already set up with an activity type that has all the information on it, that it's billable, that it has a certain color in the calendar, etc. So effectively what we've done right now is we programmed from scratch an on-site visit that is actually a two-stepper when it needs to be triggered. So let's show you another place in which you can trigger events. And let's also program another automation. So let me explain what I mean by this automation. There are two types of automatic processes that you can schedule in results. You can schedule the ones like I just showed you with the contact type, but there's also another automatic one that can be triggered that's considered a milestone. So let's put it this way. Let's say as an organization, whenever one of your technicians goes on site, you want to schedule a survey to be done via phone call within 2 days of that on-site service. Now, why did we not put that on this process itself here? Well, the reason we could not put the third item in here is because we don't know whether this service on-site is going to get rescheduled 3 or 4 times before we're able to go and take care of it. In other words, we're going to schedule it as soon as possible, but it might be getting delayed multiple times because of weather, because somebody is not at home at that time, or for whatever reason. It can get scheduled multiple times. But we want to have a survey done after the service on-site is actually done. So what we do is the following. Instead of programming it ahead of time in the initial process, you'll do what's called a chained process. So it's a chaining of one process with another, or a milestone process. How does that work? Let's go to the activity, and under the activity that's called on-site, you see this on-site service right here? You can actually tell the system that you want a process to be triggered. And so the process to be triggered could have been built in here as a take a survey. I'm going to keep it simple right now. I'm going to refer to it as a technical support incident, just to show the fact that one process, a completion of one process, one activity, will trigger another process automatically. So we're chaining 2 processes based on a milestone happening. And look what the subject says. Process to activate when the activity is flagged as completed. So whenever the service on-site ends up getting scheduled, even if it's 2 weeks from now, whenever a technician goes and tracks it and says, okay, I'm done with that, on that day that it's done, it's going to trigger a process. You would have created a process called take a survey. Right now, I know I have a survey inside the technical support incident. I'm just going to go ahead and have it trigger that. By the way, for those of you, we get surprised sometimes that this is not always a very obvious feature, but I want to make sure you're aware of it. You see this link attachment to a new activity? Results has a very powerful feature to allow you to automatically trigger or have a document attached to an activity as soon as the activity is scheduled. Sometimes you'd think that this is a process. This is an example of not something that's done as a process in results, but actually done through this button up here. So let's say there's a checklist that we will do whenever an on-site service is done. Right? A lot of companies will do that. There's a checklist when you schedule HVAC work. There's a checklist that you will do when you're doing a bookkeeping or you're going to do tax preparation. There's a checklist of what to do with that kind of an activity. So you will schedule an activity. You would load a document in the system, and then the activity can be linked to the document itself to make it automatically part of that activity when the activity gets scheduled. All right, let's see all of that coming together right now. So we created a new process that is part of a on-site service, and we're going to go ahead and have the on-site service be triggered as a milestone that will trigger another process automatically to get the job done. So let's go and see how that's all going to come together. I'm going to go ahead and close that screen right now, and let's go ahead and create and engage an existing contact record. Let's go to this client record. So Carol has no activities right now. let's say Carol calls in and says, I would like an on-site visit. So what do? From here, as we saw before, you'll see a drop-down of the available options. And now based on the one we created together, the one that's called on-site work, I'm going to go ahead and trigger that. I'm going to click OK. And the system triggers those two activities. Remember, by the way, how we made the call be made by George. Only George gets that on his to-do list because he's the one that is scheduled, is the dispatcher that schedule calls. And then in this case, because I'm logged in as Mary, then I got any activity that's not specifically assigned to a person, I'm responsible for them. So let's say George, we're going to pretend to be George right now just to move the process forward. So George makes the call and basically knows who to call, just opens up the contact record. Typical results used, right? You are able to open up the activity, the full contact record from the activity, so you can check what's going on with the account, know what needs to be done, see if they owe you money. As you talk to them, wow, okay, $2,000, maybe we can collect that as we're scheduling this work. But the point is to see anything on the profile as you're scheduling the work. So he proceeds to schedule the work and flags this as completed, and the work was scheduled, let's say, for the 16th. So we're going to go ahead and put this on the 16th, and we're going to make that a 3 p.m. And we'll do that as 1 hour and 30 minutes. Okay, so this work was scheduled, and because we scheduled it, we're going to give it to Mike. Mike is going to be responsible to do that service. Of course it is. Okay, do on-site work. Okay, I'm going to hit the save button up here. All right, so because it's a billable service, the system is warning us about this. So notice how it's saying the billable activity is 0 while the duration is 1.5. This is a very helpful note from the system. It will let you still save the record, but it's letting you know that you have not specified the billable hours yet. You've scheduled the work 1 hour and 30 minutes, so it's just a warning. And typically, that's totally okay. You're going to wait for the technician to go to the field, do the work. It might take them 2 hours, and then they will update the billable hours based on the actual final duration. Right now, it's just scheduled, right? So this is now set up, and everything is scheduled. By the way, what I was referencing before regarding the checklist document, look where it appears, right here on the document. And if you are the person doing the on-site work, you're able to trigger that, and that's your checklist right there, letting you know that these are the items you're supposed to do. This is the document that was automatically put on your activity list without any further work because you programmed it behind the scenes. More importantly, by the way, please note this is a digital copy pointing to a file. So instead of making multiple photocopies and give them to your technicians so they will have with them to use as checklists, you're having the checklist come up live electronically and become available for them as they work with this one. Also keep in mind, for those of you that are using our field service module, when you are actually in the field and looking at this and working on this document itself, you are able to see that document and open it from the field using the device that you're on, obviously assuming that they can open up PDFs or whatever. The bottom line is that that information is available to you from within your mobile device system that we support, right? So all the work is being done through your mobile device. You take pictures before, after. You're going to see what needs to be done. And the file, by the way, you see how it says open the file up here? The file is available for you to open it directly from the field and see the checklist of what you need to accomplish. All right, so at this point, everything is being taken care of. Now, let's go ahead and assume that this is the 16th, and I come and complete this activity. Notice there's only 2 steps right now, and I'm going to go ahead and complete that activity and hit save. Notice how the other process, the milestone process that I had programmed upon completion of the service ticket or the service item has now been triggered. So whatever is in that is going to get saved in here. The system is still reminding me of that billable activity. Now that we completed this, by the way, we should have come in and put 1.5 hours here so that the invoice is accurate. The point, though, is the technical support. You see the survey that was part of my technical support? It got triggered and it got programmed because behind the scenes, we did not wait on our technician that says, when you finish the work, please don't forget to schedule a survey to be done. the system automatically took care of that because we took advantage of an additional milestone trigger that the system will take care of a process that triggers, that has multiple steps, and one or more of those steps will trigger another process, and you can do more and more of that, right? So the more milestones there are, the more processes you'll put in there. Okay, we're about done with time, so I had promised to also show a couple of things. Where can you trigger processes from? So you saw the ones under the contact record right here, right? So no surprise there because you're already on the activity. Now, this might surprise you. Did you know that you can be actually on a call or taking care of something, or while you were doing the survey, the person says, you know what, I would like the technician to come back out and do something else because there's something that we're not happy with, and you did that through the survey. Did you know that you have an ability to activate a process through this button up here? Let me show you, make sure. You see this checklist up here, activate a process? You can activate a process from within an activity. And you can basically say, okay, let's do another on-site work, and we just scheduled it from there. And whatever steps are required just got inserted in here again. By the way, if this activity was part of a project or a sales opportunity, the inserted series of activities under this process will automatically be linked to the same project for you. So the system will know, since you did this work under that project, then the additional follow-up that you're going to need to do will also be under that project. So it's a very effective and very simple thing for the system to track for you. All right, let's show you two more places where you can do activities. If you wanted to do an activity with Supplies Garden, let's go ahead and show that there's no activity records under them. By the way, in this case, they're a vendor, not even a customer. And yes, you can have processes with vendors. Maybe when you order, when you do a PO, that there is a process that you follow for that. And whatever they are, the processes can be handled by the system. So you can highlight the contact record here, and you can go to this top bar, and one of the top bar items is to activate a process. Let's say I'm going to do a customer care process. A minute ago when we opened that, there were no activities. If you look now, you'll see there are activities in there. So that's another way for you to do a process. What else can you do processes within results? Sales. There's nothing that requires processes as much as an onboarding of a new client and or engaging a prospect. So when you're doing sales opportunities, it is a very powerful place for you to have a series of specific steps. What do we do when the person asks for a sample, for example, of what, a sample product that we sell? What do we do when the person asks for a brochure? There might be a process for that. Maybe it's only 3 steps, maybe 12 steps. It doesn't really matter. The point is that there's a process, and you can put them in the drop-down. You will have a salesperson working on the sales opportunity, go to the Activities tab, and activate a process. What else can you have a process? The last one is right here under Projects. If you open up a project, and you go to the Activities tab, you can also do a process. I'm worked with this project. We accomplished a couple of things. We got to a certain stage, and under the certain stage of final, at that stage we need to activate a process. So we go here and activate the process, and whatever that process is, we're just going to trigger it, and the system will proceed to put whatever bunch of activities were under that automatically in here. I'm going to show you one final thing. We're actually out of time, but I'm going to show you one thing that was not on the agenda, but people sometimes don't know that this is there. So in this case, we're looking at 3 different steps with that part of a process, and they were all pushed in here. How do you know which step was where and how they relate to each other and how the process was programmed? And what if you had one item here that you added manually and it's not part of a process? How do you know which one was manual and which one of those were part of a process? Well, here's how you find out. There's a tab called Process. And if you highlight any entry, it will tell you what step that entry is. Notice this is step number 2. And by the way, here's a definition of your process. We're going to highlight it for you and show it to you because you're always going to see it live as to what's in the process. It's step number 2, and this is how step number 2 relates to the other steps in that process. By the way, this is like any other. You're able to see more information by scrolling here or changing the columns. What about this one? That was step number 1. It presents 30%, and that's your step number 1. That was, now you highlight the third one, that's step number 3. And what about this one? That's not a process. That was a manual step, right? So effectively, then the system, that's why it's helpful to give them numbers. It's helpful to know how they relate to each other, and this system will allow you to keep them in check. If there's a reason for you to review how they came about or what's their dependency between one and the other, this is the way to do it. Well, we are out of time, but thank you so much for your time. Such an impressive audience today. We had probably one of the largest audience that we've had in recently. So I appreciate very much you taking so much for your time to be with us today. Let me see if there are any quick questions. We're done with the presentations. I'm going to see if there are any quick questions from Mike or Larry that they wanted me to highlight, and I'll be glad to answer those. The video will be sent to you as a follow-up to this. It will be a link that you can download and play directly from the video itself. Okay, we have a question on deleting a line item in a process. Okay, so there's no problem at all in deleting a line item in a process. I'm going to actually do it from here. We're looking at multiple steps in a process. The beauty about the way processes should be programmed is that you would put everything that you might need to do when you are going to be engaging, let's say, a new client. By the way, a typical process could also be with an employee. You might have an onboarding process for new employees within your organization. You also have a process for separation from a new employee. So these would be steps. Now, let's say, take an example of a new employee coming on board. You might need to fill this form if they are not a U.S. citizen. But if they're a U.S. citizen, you don't need to fill their form. So typically in a process, you would put every single step in there, and then you would review the steps and say, you know what, for this specific circumstance, we're not going to need to do this step anymore. We're going to go ahead and delete it. That person is not interested in our product, so we treated them as a lead. We triggered the lead process, and because they're not interested, we can go ahead and shut it down. Right? So you always put as many of the steps that you need. The system will not change anything for you. Notice there's still 3 steps typically in this process. We've kept step number 1, we've kept step number 2, and this was the manual process. We removed step number 3 because it was no longer applicable, but there was no harm done. It doesn't break the process for the others. It doesn't remove anything from the system. We're just using this as the roadmap or a template of how a process will be triggered, and then you decide how many of those need to be changed. You might also decide, you know what, I'm not going to do the email today. I'm going to go ahead and move that till Thursday for whatever reason. That's totally okay. That's really up to you. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to be in here on Thursday, so not only do we move it Thursday, but we're going to take it from George and give it to Jessica. Right? So these are just activities. Other than this process tab, you really can't easily tell that there's one of them came in through a process and one of them did not, and that's the whole point. The point is to minimize data entry, leverage automation and consistency in how you handle incidents or events within your office. When somebody requests something, this is what we do. When somebody comes on board as a prospect, this is what we do. When they become a client, this is what we do. When we separate from them or they don't pay their bill, this is what we do. So there's a number of steps that you can take, and they are a part of a process. You'll trigger them when you need them. Other questions? Okay. Can we delete a process? Yes, you can. So let me do a couple of one quick thing up here. So when you go to delete a process, it's like very much like deleting a record, like deleting an invoice, for example, in results. You cannot remove, let's say we want to delete this one. You can't go and delete the on-site process itself directly from here because actually you can, because there's a bug in the system. Actually, typically what you're supposed to do first is you're supposed to remove the line items, one line item by themselves, and you'll delete that line item. Then you'll delete the other line item. And now that you have no longer any line items on the actual process, you'll be able to say, I don't need this process anymore. And the other item, it wasn't asked, but I'm going to touch on it right now, is that what if you want to change, okay, it's not letting me take it out totally because it's already in use by one of the activities within the system. And so that's a protection of the system of not letting that a use process to be totally removed. There's going to need to be a reference to it. One other item that we get asked all the time, what if I change my mind and add a process here, to add a line item to the process? So we had 3, and I put a new lead in here, and now I want to add one more in here, and it's going to be a meeting. Okay, does that affect anything else that was already entered in the system? And the answer is no. You can change a process after the fact. It's now a 4-step process. From now on, if I trigger this process, it will insert 4 steps. But this meeting is not going to go back to previous processes that have been triggered and reinsert itself in there for obvious reasons. You would not want that to happen because you might have already taken care of the account. There might be multiple things that account might have now become even a client, and you triggered the lead in there 3 months ago. We will not go back and change a process after it's been triggered and has been handled, but all future ones will be based on the new version of this process. All right. Well, we are out of time for sure. Thank you all very much for your time today. We will follow up with an email within 1 day to get you a copy of the recording that will be available to you to review and share with others as you see fit. Thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.